Okay, so we're going to wrap up the Cold War now, and we're going to do 1970 to 1991 all in one shot. So I'm going to move pretty quickly through this, and we're going to start off with Richard Nixon. Now, Richard Nixon had other things to deal with outside of the Vietnam War. He actually tried to reach out to both the Soviet Union and China and try to normalize or improve relations, and he was successful for a period of time with the Soviet Union. This period is known as détente, and it's another word meaning the easing of tensions. And so easing of tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. And one of the ways that we eased tensions with the Soviet Union was the SALT Treaty, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. We agreed to reduce the number of missiles that we both had. So Nixon was able to work. He wasn't so successful in his domestic policy, which we'll see later on, but he was quite successful in regards to dealing with the Soviet Union in this time period. And he was also the first president to ever visit China. As you see here, he's with Mao, hanging out on the Great Wall of China here. But Nixon, reached out to China, and this is the reason why all your clothes are made in China now, because he basically opened up China once again and normalized relations with China. We have what was called ping pong diplomacy. We brought our U.S. ping pong team over and played the Chinese ping pong team, which I'm pretty sure we lost. Or if you saw Forrest Gump, you saw images of this. But this was Nixon again reaching out to the other Soviet nation in the world and trying to create some ties with them. Now this created tension between the Soviet Union and the United States, and actually, or Soviet Union and China, and actually forced the Soviet Union to be more amenable to the things that we were asking them to do. So Nixon was playing the two countries off one another, but it was working. We get to Jimmy Carter now. So Jimmy Carter, his big thing was trying to normalize things in the Middle East. So Carter opens up the Camp David Accords. Camp David is where the president has their vacation home. And so he brings in Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin, who is the leaders of Egypt and Israel. And he's able to get a ceasefire between those two countries. Now, this is a lot of conflict over the establishment of Israel and like the existence of Israel at this time. And so continual outbreaks of war were going on in the Middle East over Israel. And so this was trying to bring peace in the Middle East between these two powers. Successful for the time being. Sadat and Begin won the Nobel Peace Prize for their agreement. This was an achievement for Jimmy Carter. Not so much of an achievement was the Iran hostage crisis. And this occurred in 1979 and lasted until 1981. This is the Iranian Revolution that takes place in 1979, led by the Ayatollah Khomeini, you see here. This was brought by young people in Iran who wanted to kick out the Shah of Iran. And the Shah had been placed there by the United States, one of those events where we had intervened into another government's leadership and taken it over and put our guy in there. So the Shah actually was having health problems, came to the United States, and the uprising took place. And our embassy was raided, and everybody at the embassy was held hostage. And this became a troublesome thing for Carter because he was running for re-election in he was running for re-election in 1980, and this became a horrible stain on his presidency, and he was seen as kind of ineffective. And so it'll lead to an issue in that election. Also, in 1979, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. So here's Carter having to deal with both of these things, a hostage crisis and the Soviets taking advantage of this and invading Afghanistan to expand communism. Another domino theory in the Middle East, falling in the Middle East possibly. And so we have to use our policies of containment. So we give money and weapons and advisors to the freedom fighters in Afghanistan who actually came from all over the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia. And one of those people was Osama bin Laden. And this group was called the Mujahideen. So our CIA worked with the Mujahideen to try to kick out the communist forces. And over 9 years, the Soviets, this is their Vietnam. It's a horrible experience for them. they control all the cities, but they can't control the countryside, just like we couldn't do in Vietnam. And eventually they withdraw, but not before they completely destroy Afghanistan and bomb it back into the Stone Age. It basically becomes like this, all of the modern aspects of Afghanistan had been wiped away, and they became a poor and suffering nation, which was rife for radicals and terrorist groups to come in and take over. And as a result of the invasion of Afghanistan, the United States actually boycotts going to the Olympic Games in Moscow. So we do not send our forces over there, or our team over there. And as a result, a number of Olympians are unable to compete in the Olympics there. But we do, in this 1980, we happen to have the Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, and the Soviets do not boycott this Olympics. They come over, they want to teach us a lesson, and we beat them at their own game. And in 1980 Winter Olympics, we complete the Miracle on Ice. And this is kind of the, this is just like the Berlin Wall was kind of a symbol of the Cold War. This is a symbol of the Cold War. The United States beating the Soviets on the hockey rink is the only place where we could actually compete with them instead of on the battlefield. So this was a major victory for us in some ways. 1980, again, Middle East. This is a period where a lot of the problems that we face today can be traced back to this period of the Cold War, and the Iran-Iraq War in 1980 is another example of this. So Iran, not too happy with them. They are holding hostages of ours. Saddam Hussein, leader of Iraq, goes to war with Iran, and initially we support Saddam. And we are giving money and weapons to Saddam to fight against the Iranians. And this is becoming a very hot war in the Middle East, in Iraq and Iran. And, so this is going to be the kind of the roots of our relationship with these two countries. We eventually will overthrow Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and we still have, issues with the Iranian government. And so all of this goes back to this time period. Ronald Reagan, he wins the election in 1980, and miraculously, right after he wins the election, on his inauguration day, we see the hostage crisis come to an end. And there's rumors of this secret deal that had been made between Reagan's people and the Iranian government, but it's kind of a not entirely proven situation, but this is something that becomes kind of a controversy down the line. And that comes to light in 1987, where we see the Iran-Contra affair, and this is a scandal in Reagan's presidency where his administration illegally sold weapons to Iran in order to come up with money to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. So we start to see communism popping up in Central America, and now it comes to light that we are actually selling weapons to Saddam Hussein's enemies. So we're funding both sides of that war. And the problem here is that the Reagan administration didn't ask Congress for permission to do this. And so this becomes a huge scandal, threatens to take down Reagan in the presidency. And the only saving grace is that it's not tied to Reagan, because Oliver North, as seen here, kind of takes the fall for it and goes to prison as the sole person who kind of decided to do this on his own. So the Iran-Contra affair becomes a huge political scandal during the end of the Cold War. As a strategy of the Cold War during Reagan's presidency, he actually ramps up military spending. He decides he's going to outspend the Soviet Union. And part of that is his Star Wars program, which was named around the time of the Star Wars movies. So, there's that. But it was also known as SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, or lasers in space. Yeah, the idea was that we would have a missile defense system that if the Soviets launched their nukes, we would be able to shoot them out of the sky. And so therefore we would have a defense shield. And the Soviets became so concerned about this that they started, increasing their military spending beyond what they were capable of. And our national budget our national deficits go through the roof at this time. But this is enough to scare the Soviet Union into trying to compete with us. He also calls out the Soviet Union as the evil empire. And, hawkish people in America thought that this was a great thing, that we were actually, calling them out and challenging them. And so the hostilities kind of come back between the US and the Soviet Union until Mikhail Gorbachev comes into power in 1985. And Gorbachev and Reagan actually start to have kind of a good relationship over time, albeit rocky at times. But one of those famous moments was Ronald Reagan going to the Berlin Wall, just like JFK had gone there and done that. But Reagan gives a speech in which he urges Gorbachev to tear down the wall, basically like, let's just end this. Let's get rid of this symbol and end the Cold War. And Reagan's vice president, soon to be President Bush, eventually wins his opportunity to be president. And he is the president that is in office when the Berlin Wall finally comes down in 1989. So Gorbachev effectively lets the wall get torn down. German citizens decide one day they're just going to go ahead and do it. And the Soviet soldiers do not engage. And the wall is torn down. And it's not immediately that the Cold War is over, but over the course of the next 2 years, we see uprisings and peaceful uprisings in all of the Eastern Bloc countries in Europe, and the Soviet Union starts to slowly peel back and eventually dissolves in 1991, and the Cold War comes to an end. So I was going to show this to you, but I'm not going to now. Maybe I'll do it in class. But yeah, so that's the end of the Cold War, and we'll be doing a little bit of a recap in class tomorrow. Thanks for listening.